Yeah, I'm glad to be here again. I guess, what is it, like 6 months on from the last time I was sitting here giving a presentation on directed panspermia as a part of another QRI meetup. But yeah, just for the record, like 6 to 8 hours ago, got off a plane from Boston and like got barely any sleep. So I hope I'm like sufficiently cogent to explain these high level concepts. This is a paper that I'm writing in collaboration with Chris Percy and Andres from QRI, and it's basically titled "The Hard Problem of Valence: Efforts to Date and Why More Research is Needed." And the purpose of the paper is basically to kind of do some conceptual landscaping, if you will, and try and like kind of formulate this problem that nobody else in the literature and consciousness research seems to be like actively working on, which is actually like grounding like a theory of valence or grounding valence and proposing a mechanism for what causes valence, what is valence. And yeah, I also, just before I begin, I guess this is like a work in progress, so would definitely appreciate any feedback or any comments. If anybody is like particularly interested in this, then I could even share an early draft. If you just like, my email should be on the last slide. And yeah, and also one of the reasons we're recording it is that I was actually just, I think a week and a half ago, I was in Tucson, Arizona for the Science of Consciousness conference, the 30th anniversary for it. And yeah, you can see in some slides here, this is me and Andres and Susan Blackmore and my monkey puppet, which is like, yeah, an online kind of personality. And then that's me and Chris over there. And so we all got to present our research. Andres and Chris both presented, different topics. I presented this, however, literally moments before I went up to give my presentation, the projector like completely broke down, as you can see here. So yeah, it'd just be like, yeah, cool to actually do a presentation with the PowerPoints. I had to kind of just like go through it without. But yeah, so yeah, just before I begin, some housekeeping. So when I use the term consciousness, I'm referring to phenomenal consciousness, which is referring to the raw qualities or properties that make our subjective experiences feel the way that they do. Other descriptions in the philosophical literature emphasize the what it is likeness of being in a particular moment of experience or of having a first-person perspective. And then secondly, when I refer to valence, I'm referring to the intrinsically positive or negative hedonic tone or affective quality of these conscious experiences. And common examples of valence states include pleasure and pain, happiness and sadness, euphoria and dysphoria, all of which feel intrinsically pleasant or unpleasant to the experiential subject. And so yeah, hopefully you guys kind of get what I'm talking about here. But it's difficult to actually propose a precise definition of it. We're just kind of pointing toward this thing that we actually haven't sufficiently explained, which is kind of one of the reasons why we're writing the paper. It's also important to note that valence is not a binary property. So, you know, some experiences can feel better or worse than others. And it's also like there's a lot of variation between different valence states of consciousness. I could have a mixed valence experience. You know, I could, like, I'm sitting here right now, I'm kind of like a bit stimulated because I had a Monster energy drink and I'm excited, but I'm also a bit tired, right? And so there's like various different like valence qualities to my experience, and maybe I can introspect and kind of come to a summation of all of these qualities. But yeah, it's like, yeah, we need to formalize this thing. So that's kind of the housekeeping. So for nearly 3 decades, philosophical discourse about consciousness has centered on the so-called hard problem. Why should physical processes give rise to subjective experiences? I'm sure like many of you are familiar with this. This is posited by Chalmers in, I think, 1995. Another way to frame this problem is how do we ground our first-person experiences within our existing third-person models of reality? And to some, developing a formal solution to the hard problem of consciousness, it's considered the holy grail of philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, among many other interested domains. Others dismiss the hard problem as a red herring. Either there is no hard problem to be solved, which is to say it's the result of philosophical confusion, or it's an intractable problem. And in the paper and in this presentation, we leave aside these debates to focus instead on a related problem concerning valence. So we propose, this is kind of like attention grabbing, you know, the hard problem of valence, because the hard problem of consciousness has been discussed so much. But it actually is a hard problem, and I guess it can be summarized as follows. Like, why do some experiences feel better or worse than others? And specifically, what mechanisms might ground such differences in perceived affect? So most accept valence as a core feature of consciousness, but few scholars have attempted to explicitly account for what pleasure and pain actually are within experience, or how valence might relate to various accounts of consciousness that have been proposed in the literature. And so, for example, it's common for interpretations of the global workspace theory of consciousness to identify the broadcasting of information to multiple mental modules as the point at which information becomes consciously perceived, but it leaves out what sorts of information processing might be associated with positive or negative experience. And then likewise, the integrated information theory of consciousness identifies the phenomenology of a conscious system with its internal causal structure, but it fails to specify what kinds of structural features might convey the valence of the experience, either within a given moment or across multiple different frames. So yeah, this is kind of just like this big void, this thing that people aren't really like, specifically addressing. And we thought, why not write a paper on it? Because it seems very important. There's also an implicit assumption in the literature that if we solve the hard problem of consciousness, this will naturally lead to an explanation for valence, or at least that the question of valence would not require standalone attention. Our paper argues that the problem of valence is sufficiently different from the problem of consciousness that there's merit in dedicating standalone effort to it, but without conceding the important links between these problems and I guess these concepts. Depending on one's background philosophical assumptions, working on the problem of valence independently might even shed light on the hard problem of consciousness. But even if we put aside the problem of consciousness entirely, there are other important reasons why we should prioritize valence. So, why are we all here? This is a QRI kind of meetup. You guys have heard about consciousness before. I'm sure you're interested in it. But, why does it matter? And, it's because consciousness matters, but in particular, I want to claim valence matters. When we talk about moments of experience having a value, we're generally referring to their valence, as I said, the inherent pleasant or unpleasant qualities. Some examples, like when I go to the National Gallery, which I haven't been to on this trip, but last year I did, and I appreciate a beautiful piece of art. The state of consciousness that I inhabit in that moment has a value. It's pleasant to me. It has an aesthetic value, maybe. And then likewise, when I spend quality time with loved ones or friends, when I enter into deep, tranquil states of meditation, or in other possible worlds, definitely not this one, when I become one with the universe on 5-MeO DMT, these are beautiful, loving states to inhabit. And I think when I graduate from my PhD program, I'm sure the experience is going to feel super meaningful to me in that moment. Here you can just see a graphical representation of various different positively valenced experiences that people report, created by Andres in a classic post on quality computing. Here the size of the nodes is proportional to the number of appearances in the data set, and the edge weights are estimated in proportion to when one experience differs to another. So, as you can see, hopefully, when we talk about positive valence, we're not just talking about wireheading at ourselves to maximize physical pleasure or bliss. We're actually just talking about any given state of consciousness that has a sense of beauty or significance to the perceiving subject, and this comprises the whole range of meaningful human emotional states. The point is, regardless of what words or labels we might use to describe their positive qualities, these states have a valence, and this seems to approximate value, however we conceive of it or however we model it. It's also important to briefly note that valence is not a function of a set of circumstances or states of affairs in a person's life that we can just point at externally or directly observe. As I noted earlier, it is a phenomenal property, or it's a property of phenomenal consciousness. And to that extent, or to the extent that our experiences are private, our experiences of valence are too. So, for example, I can't access your phenomenology in this moment. I can't know what it's like to be all of you right now. I can infer it in a similar way to if I pinch myself and I experience a negative sensation, maybe you can update your model of this room and my emotional state, and you can infer that I'm feeling this sensation, but you can't directly access it. And this is, precisely why I think valence is an important problem to be working on. If it's real and if it's not just an illusion, then we should be able to actually test for it directly in other conscious systems. But to be able to do that, to be able to build the technologies that allow us to do that, we actually need to clarify our conceptual understanding of valence. And yeah, broadly that's what this paper is trying to do. This is just like the inverse, negative valence, kind of similar graphical representation. Negatively valent states have a quality of aversion or unpleasantness, and this seems to approximate disvalue, actually to the extent that avoiding suffering plays an important role in virtually all widely accepted theories of morality and well-being in philosophy, albeit to varying extents. So in some cases, negatively valent states might give us, a useful signal to change our behaviours, but this is highly sensitive to the particular cause and other states of affairs that are contingently associated with that state of consciousness. So a classic example is, if a child sticks their finger in a flame and suffers physical pain, the aversive quality of that state of consciousness, teaches them to avoid that behaviour in the future, and that's correlated with a reduction in their evolutionary fitness. But this is not the case when, a factory farmed pig is slaughtered without anaesthetic and experiences every moment of excruciating pain before its death. That state of consciousness actually just has no function in that context. And so, it might be the case that, contingently, sometimes valence has an important role, and negative valence in particular has an important role to play in how we model the world and how we navigate, problems. But this isn't always the case, and there is still disvalue when that's not the case and the function isn't there. I want to claim, other things being equal, suffering is a bad thing to experience from the perspective of the one who endures it, and to that extent, or to the extent that we want to reduce its prevalence in the world, we need to treat the root cause of suffering rather than just its symptoms. Again, this requires us to actually have a coherent theory of valence, to understand the mechanism that is responsible for its generation or its occurrence more broadly. Better understanding the phenomenon of valence is also important to solving contemporary ethical problems. So, for example, if and when we build conscious artificial systems, we ought to ensure that by bringing them into existence, that we don't cause them to experience excruciating suffering, either by accident or intentionally. As I noted before, we presently have no way of telling whether a system has the capacity for valence, and if it does, how we would even begin to quantify its valence or measure it in a practical setting. And this seems important for obvious reasons. We can usually infer the valence of other humans because, as I noted before, for evolutionary reasons, we can infer these states. We have theory of mind for organisms that are sufficiently phylogenetically related to us, manifesting in our speaking shared languages, being able to interpret behavioural cues like facial expressions, tone of voice, etc. But this capacity rapidly decreases the further that we go from humans along the phylogenetic tree of life, to the extent that there remains fervent debate in the animal sentience literature as to whether fish can feel pain, much less insects or invertebrates. Answering these questions definitively actually requires us to understand, as I said, the mechanism for valence generation. I'm sorry if I'm piling on the significance here, but this is really important, So anyway, moving on. So in line with this goal, our paper has two primary contributions, which we hope will serve as a prompt and a useful framework for developing a solution, or maybe just a set of possible solutions to the hard problem of valence that we've proposed. So first, in the paper, we systematically specify a range of different phenomena associated with valence that we think that any robust theory of valence should be able to explain, or at least should be able to account for. And then secondly, we consider some candidate theories of valence, some conceivable theories that might be posited and defended, and we see how they fare against these criteria. So this approach kind of resembles efforts in recent years to create itemized lists of requirements to be satisfied by different theories of consciousness, and admittedly some have criticized these efforts of trying to be super analytical and posit these lists and then test different theories against these lists. People critique them as being incomplete or reductionist. We think they nonetheless provide a structured foundation for assessing the merits and shortcomings of different theories. And to the extent of our literature review, we're not aware of any existing itemization efforts for valence, which is why we're attempting it. What we're not doing is we're not claiming that our attempt at doing this is the be-all, end-all of we've got all of the criteria and all of the candidate theories. This is just intended to be a stepping stone, because there's just a lot of confusion and nobody seems to be thinking about what valence is and what causes it at the implementation level. So in the spirit of this endeavour, we propose the following 6 categories, each of which contains a set of phenomena which we call explananda, which is items or phenomena that should be explained by a robust theory of valence. These are introspective, decisional, interpersonal, evolutionary, correlates, and analytical. Some of the items listed under these categories are derived from existing discourse in the philosophical and scientific literature on consciousness, while others point toward more simple and intuitive phenomena associated with valence that you can maybe access just by directly introspecting on your experience in different moments. Here you can see a table which provides examples of the 23 requirements or items that we've identified so far. Again, it's not complete, but this is a good start. And then filtered into these 6 different categories. I won't go over each of the items. I can maybe do that after the presentation, either during discussion or just if you want to come up to me and ask what any of these are in particular. I'll just briefly go over what the categories kind of broadly point toward. So introspective features of the pleasure/pain experience that are identifiable by most people on thoughtful introspection. There's decisional criteria, specific aspects of how valence influences our decision making, where actual or predicted experiences of valence play a particular role in the decision making process. There's interpersonal, so we need to be able to explain interpersonal variation in valence experiences, such that any given mechanistic account is capable of being, applied in a diverse range of contexts. There's evolutionary, which is on the assumption that biological mechanisms for generating valence evolved through natural selection. There are certain features related to valence experiences that ought to be explained. There are correlates, various chemical, brain, physiological features that accompany particular valence experiences and can maybe prevent or enhance them. We need to be able to explain, the relationship between these correlating, properties and the experience. And then finally, there's analytical, and this kind of refers to conceptual challenges that raise questions about the ontological nature of valence and what physical mechanisms could generate it in principle. So this is non-exhaustive. There's probably a whole range of additional phenomena that should be explained by a comprehensive in-game theory of valence, and hopefully other people will come in after we publish this and suggest some more, or maybe even critique this list and say these actually don't need to be explained. As I said, a gentle nudge in the direction of formalizing the study of this phenomenon. An example of, there might be other constraints that we should use to test theories of valence. For example, we might want our theories to be testable using present-day technologies, or maybe we're already ontologically committed to one mode of explaining consciousness, and this probably rules out certain modes of explaining valence. But because our paper is neutral on such matters, we're not taking a stance on what consciousness is. We're just considering all of the possibilities together, and it's up to the individual theorist to filter out the ones that cohere with or conflict with their preconceptions. So anyway, hopefully that's not too analytical. The second primary contribution of this paper, our reading of the literature has identified a number of theories, or not necessarily theories, but hints toward a conceivable theory that we're kind of stating plainly. Theories which implicitly or explicitly propose an account of what grounds valence, and we've grouped these into 4 distinct categories which operate at different levels of ontological inquiry, with a few selected examples of each. The first 3 categories identify valence as a feature of physical substrates, while the 4th identifies it as a non-physical substrate. And we take this approach primarily for the sake of analytical convenience, again acknowledging that a complete account of valence might specify elements occurring at multiple levels simultaneously. So I'll just briefly go over what these theories are and include examples of explanations for valence which they might posit. Starting, the first category that we consider is algorithmic theories of valence, which includes computational or informational theories. These ground their conception of valence on the fulfillment or frustration of goals and functions, whether they are considered to be fixed to a system or adjustable. So such theories would claim that valence can be realized within any given physical system that's capable of instantiating the correct or the required algorithmic processes as defined by the theory, and are therefore not restricted to being implemented within a particular physical substrate. Basically, any computing system that can implement the algorithm is has a valence according to these theories. So yeah, in the paper we consider two such theories. There's predictive processing theories and goal fulfillment theories. So the first, predictive processing theories, can be understood in various ways, but a general formulation would claim that positive and negative valence are equivalent to the degree to which a system's predictions are accurate, so that any reduction in free energy corresponds to improved valence. And then in contrast, goal fulfillment theories would reduce the phenomenon of valence to the state of a system's preference architecture. So like, in other words, the level of fulfillment of its goals or optimization functions, given some sensory processing capacities to assess the state of these goals. So an example of this second class of theories, Brian Tomasic argues that positive and negative valence represent the degree to which a system's most basic processes or subroutines have their utility function satisfied. And he would say that the valence of a system like a human or another animal is like entirely reducible to these like more basic rudimentary processes. So yeah, this is one approach you could take. So the second and third categories, the low-level and high-level physical feature theories, claim or they're dependent on particular physical substrates, unlike category 1. So in particular, the former targets primitive features as close to the most basic level of physical analysis as possible, while the latter targets more complex physical features and structures which emerge from these like basic kind of primitives. So for category 2 theories, systems with a valence must be composed of a particular substrate specified by the theory, which constrains the set of possible valence systems compared to category 1. So we consider three candidate theories under this category. First is the symmetry theory of valence, which Curie is quite known for. So the symmetry theory of valence posits a set of ontological axioms through which it grounds the phenomenon of valence in an experience's structural features, in particular its symmetries. So to the extent that all experiences have a structure, it would claim all experiences have a valence. And actually the triangle that was in one of the earlier slides comes from Principia Qualia, which this is also taken from. Another more technical way to phrase this is that for any given experience there exists a hypothetical mathematical object which is isomorphic to that experience's phenomenology, and the phenomenon of valence corresponds to the symmetries present in that object's mathematical structures. So it's like a very formal, very like crisp, precise account of what valence is. Then next we identified two formulations of general resonance theories of valence. So the first might claim that an oscillating entity experiences or conveys higher valence if its oscillations have a certain like mathematical features, such as higher hertz, more complex harmonics, or its proximity to resonant frequencies. And then the second class of these would posit that rather than there being a set of ideal features, it would describe valence as the extent to which two or more oscillating entities are in phase with each other, taking into consideration contextual factors like phase difference, frequency match, temporal alignment, among others. And then last is electromagnetic field theories of valence, which would posit that some basic feature of EM fields corresponds to their valence, such as the strength of the field, its energy density, polarization, maybe specific topological features, among others. We're not putting forward like an exact account of what these are. These are just like types of I guess like theories that might ground valence at this level of analysis. So as valence is a property of consciousness, this theory commits to EM field theories of consciousness being correct, unlike the other two, which could be applied more generally toward other fundamental physical entities. So yeah, this I guess like conveys that certain theories of valence are going to like constrain what theories of consciousness would be accepted. And then the third category is similarly exclusive to the second. Systems with a valence must possess certain substrate-specific features, but it differs in that it specifies high-level physical features that weakly emerge from fundamental physical entities. And again, we consider three theories in this category. So first are theories which identify valence in proportion to the presence or absence of specific chemicals that our brain produces, such as neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, or noradrenaline. These theories posit that these chemicals not only mediate and are correlated with valence experiences, but are axiomatically identical with these experiences. So like how much pleasure you feel is like identical to how much of like whatever hormone you identify as like valence being reducible to is like present in your system. The second group of theories are those which identify valence with the activation of particular anatomical regions of the brain, so structures like the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the ventral striatum, or one could identify valence with specific patterns of neuronal activity within these regions, or maybe expressed more broadly across the nervous system. And then the third category would be evolutionary theories of valence, of which we identified two variants. The first would posit that a system has higher valence the closer it is to a stable set of processes that approximate homeostasis, while the second could ground valence in the act of replication, such that the more a system replicates or reproduces itself, the higher its valence. And then, finally, the fourth category describes non-physical theories, according to which the phenomenon of valence occurs independently or separately from physical reality. So such theories would therefore depend upon metaphysical assumptions concerning the existence of non-physical entities and their relationship with physical entities, for which the theorist must provide an explicit account. And then I couldn't think of a better image, so I just put a galaxy brain in. But we consider three candidate theories here, acknowledging that the boundaries between them are potentially fuzzy and open to interpretation. And in brief, proponents of the first theory must account for valence within their non-physicalist ontology, that of mental entities, such as positing an inherent property or quality to certain non-physical entities, or there bearing some relation to physical states of affairs, like in the body or whatever. Second, Platonic theories of valence posit the existence of a non-physical realm containing Platonic forms, of which we identify two possible accounts for valence. The first is that the valence of an entity increases in proportion to how closely it approximates its Platonic form. So, for example, the closer a physical circle is to the perfect form of a circle, you could say the better that circle feels, if it has a valence, let's say. The second variant would posit some inherently valenced Platonic form or set of forms corresponding to different qualities of valence experience, and would measure the valence of any given entity in terms of its proximity to that form. And then the third theory, the final theory that we consider, would measure valence as a function of an entity's alignment with a given spiritual concept that one posits or believes in. So where that concept is understood as explicitly non-physical in nature. And examples of possible concepts include natural harmony or reduced imbalance in Taoism, or felt proximity to God's presence in Christianity. Basically by comparing like a lot of these candidate theories, like we can't go into a lot of detail because we are constrained by the fact that we're writing a paper and there are word limits on papers that you can submit to journals. But by comparing them to the 23 requirements that I described earlier, our key conclusion in the paper is that none of the theories are complete, in the sense of providing a full account of the mechanisms for valence generation that address all of the explananda that we propose. So, unfortunately, I lack the space to go over each of them in this presentation, but maybe this gives you guys an incentive to read the paper. As I said, you can email me if you're interested. But before I close, I would like to note, importantly, that while none of the theories that we considered satisfy all of the requirements that we propose, this doesn't imply that they're all equally incomplete. So some theories have a much more natural account for these requirements than others. And importantly, if we were to actually take the problem of valence seriously, expanding upon the many different possible interpretations or explanations for it and attempting to derive empirically testable predictions from their premises, we think it's very conceivable that some of these theories could become complete. So, in short, the primary constraint in validating these theories is actually just mere interest in the problem, or just clarifying our approach to solving the problem, for grounding the existence of valence, and explaining what mechanisms are responsible for it. With that, I will close, and there's my email and website, curirai.org. Time for discussion if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
Is the galaxy brain figure in the paper?
No. This is just I just created a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, more serious question then. So, if we validated 11 different theories that are all different in different aspects, and none of them get to the holy grail of all of it, which ones do get? Which one are at the top of it?
So we don't actually attempt to rank them individually. I guess like there are some theories that like maybe only account for like, you know, several items, and then other theories which account for like more than half of them, depending on like, I guess like how aggressively you would argue for them accounting for the items that we propose in that table. I think like, yeah, I guess Curai's position and my position, although this isn't in the paper, is that like the symmetry theory of valence is like pretty sweet, and you know we should actually try and test this. But like, yeah, STV is just like, yeah, it's obviously very recent and hasn't received that much like attention outside of, you know, these kinds of circles. Like there are very few mentions of it in the literature, and you know, like even fewer people attempting to test it. But yeah, like we're not really like, you know, kind of putting forward, you know, saying this is more or less likely, because fundamentally it's just like there's just so little like, you know, evidence. there's yeah, so few, you know, attempts at actually validating these theories, that we're just trying to be like, okay, this is what, like, if you have a preferred theory or a countervalence, then like this is the stuff that you should be trying to account for, or you know, this is how you should develop the theory in order to kind of make it more robust, if that makes sense. So yeah.
What properties does the theory of valence the symmetry theory of valence not satisfy?
I would, maybe this is like, I'd have to go over my notes.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, but it's, yeah, we'll talk about it later if you want.
Cool.
Yeah.
So am I right in thinking these different theories can predict different characteristics of valence, and the question then is which theory most accurately predicts what we see?
Yeah. So that's interesting. There are like different ways that you can kind of approach the kind of the quest for, you know, creating or developing like a comprehensive or a robust theory of valence. One of them is that you can just see these as like models that have like, you know, a lot of predictive power, and maybe like, you know, to the extent that we have a model of valence that is like good enough that we can just kind of point it to any sentient system that has a valence and just like get a reading that like almost perfectly approximates, you know, its valence or its self-reported valence, then maybe that's sufficient. A more philosophical, I guess, like approach to this question would be like, no, we actually need to like we need like not only a model that just like predicts it in like virtually every context, but we need to like actually ground it within like our, you know, fundamental, you know, kind of axioms about what exists and how things that exist kind of interact in order to create the world and create reality. And so yeah, I guess like the latter camp would be more like explicitly trying to be like, you know, okay, how do we account for this thing that is real, that is missing from our, you know, existing models of reality? Whereas the former camp might be like, it doesn't matter, like, you know, whether or not we have an ontological commitment to this thing's existence, so long as we have a model that like tracks the thing or our perception of the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so, because I guess when you're explaining the theories, I was thinking they just all sound like different ways of predicting. But actually, you know, you say they do then suggest different entities as well in terms of what's going on. But even with the both prediction and like entities, it seems like it doesn't, because it doesn't address the hard problem of consciousness, it's still like not bridging the kind of gap between subjective and objective. Is that okay?
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it would depend on like what theory of valence you endorse or you're trying to develop, and you know, for whether or not you're trying to kind of like, you know, bridge the explanatory gap, or you're just trying to kind of like come up with a model that is like, you know, almost perfect in terms of its like predictive capacity. I would say, I guess it depends on like the theorist and like how deep they want to go and like grounding valence, or just like simply like refining our model of it, if that makes sense. Yeah, I personally fall into the camp of wanting to ground it. Like there are a few things that I think fundamentally exist, and valence is one of them. So yeah, but I'm also a philosopher, so I'm very biased. Yeah.
Is the primary thing that you feel differentiates, let's say, like the hard problem of color from the hard problem of valence, just the fact that valence has more ethical import? I sort of missed that. I think you tried to address that at the beginning, and maybe I just want some clarification.
Yeah, so I mean, I would certainly argue this. I think there are strong arguments that like have nothing to do with, I guess, the ethical significance of like wanting to reduce suffering or understand what well-being is, you know, at the implementation level. There are arguments that like, you know, you could conceivably have experiences where there are like are no colors, or there's just like a single color and there's no there, you know, maybe like I think that there could be arguments that would, you know, kind of like put forward valence as like maybe a more ontologically privileged phenomenal property than color, or maybe like various other things like you know, touch sensations or you know, sight or sound or anything like that. But yeah, my motivation is the ethical motivation, I guess.
A related question to this is that then, if we have colors, and colors generally seem to feel neutral to me.
Mm-hmm.
There must be a reason why evolution recruited valence for like reinforcement learning rather than like color or color, something like color. So why the question is like at a bit higher level, why did evolution recruit valence as its mechanism for reinforcement learning?
So I guess I'm a valence realist, so I think valence is like, you know, real and intrinsic, and it's not just like a leaky abstraction from our models of consciousness. So I would say that it's kind of like probably, this is just like spitballing, but probably like in my model, the function of color is probably being able to like distinguish like, you know, useful or like relevant features of different objects or surfaces to be able to like navigate our environments with like more precision. Whereas like the primary function of valence is just like, as you said, it's like pushing us toward or away from various stimuli in such a way that like ultimately correlates with reproductive success. And I think that like it's plausible to me that you could have like another mechanism like for that I guess fulfills the function of color perception that would allow you to distinguish different features without having like color qualia values explicitly represented within your experience. It's not clear that you could do something like that with valence, or maybe you could, but it would just be a lot more costly, like energetically, and maybe valence is just like the simplest way of like designing an organism such that it like follows these gradients, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I guess my question is related as well. I guess I'm just having trouble disentangling the notion of valence from the notion of a valuable experience, which seems to link to the ethical side of it. I wonder, are you sort of thinking of this whole enterprise as something that you can do independently of having an ethical view on like whether these experiences are valuable in an ethical sense?
Yeah, so I wanna motivate research in this, like based on kind of like a somewhat normative argument of just like, you know, look at all of your life experiences and why do you do things, you know, like why do some experiences matter, you know, and like we should understand this, and like I hope this will appeal to most people and that this would like, you know, spark interest. But I think fundamentally, this is descriptive. We're just trying to like understand this phenomenon, and it certainly has like pretty explicit normative implications regarding both like ourselves and how we treat other beings. And like it certainly relates to, I guess, like, you know, philosophical theories of ethics, but like the question or the project to I guess like answering the hard problem of valence or proposing a solution. That it's not expressly normative, but it's like obviously very like on the borders with it. So
I have a pragmatic question, which is more about the sort of structure of the paper, maybe.
Yeah.
Although as it's been presented here. So when it comes to the list you've got, it's pretty exhaustive. When you think about this, do you think about this more like, I want to produce something that's kind of, that one can take on board and kind of, because it just seems like maybe some of these things can be collapsed into each other. I can't think of specifics now. I mean, I was looking at some of the things in sort of the neuroscientific context. And thinking, brain modules, can I kind of collapse that into something else?
Yeah.
I guess it depends on your, that second point, which is which theory you're using, because then different aspects are going to take primacy.
Yeah.
But it just feels like maybe if you want it to be useful, you should aim for, and you probably are, aiming for sort of parsimony in the list.
Yeah.
Is there something you feel like you could collapse into something else?
Yeah.
It just looks big.
Yeah. No, this is honestly, this is a very like fair critique, and it's funny you say this because the original list was 24. It's like Chris was the first person that put this draft together and sent it out to Andres and I, and then yeah, we managed to like collapse two of them into one, so now it's 23, and we might be able to do this to a further extent. Ultimately, it could be like an interesting exercise would be, say you take like a category of theories, you know, we propose the 4 different categories. It could be that for certain like ontological, you know, accounts of valence or like attempts at grounding valence, maybe there are only like 15 items that have to be accounted for, because some theories like actually like especially the evolutionary explananda, for example, like, you know, some theories might actually just reject that this is just something that has to be explained.
Yeah, but then we kind of lose our level playing field. Don't we?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. It's maybe I guess the reason it's so big is that it's kind of trying to kind of collect everything together and trying to be like, this is like this is the possibility space, and then the individual theorists can, I guess, like navigate all of the the items at their own discretion based on what their theory says. But yeah.
I have a question about SVD, but I think maybe I should leave it for the end just in case people have more questions.
I have it.
I was going to ask, I wonder if there are any sort of like naive combinations of different explanatory theories that say like this one fulfills like one half the explananda and this one fulfills the other, so if we match them together, bam, this is a complete theory. Did you check for this or notice any standouts like that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's certainly possible for a theory to kind of like be pointing at phenomena at different levels simultaneously. I guess we haven't written about that in the paper, and I guess there would be some constraints on that, just given that, like, I don't know, like, you know, if you have like an account of like what valence, you know, is fundamentally, and you say it is like, you know, a particular type of computation, but it's also like a particular substrate specific feature, then maybe there's an incompatibility toward, you know, these two claims, depending on how they're formulated. Like it could be that like certain types of computation that are like intimately bound with the you know, the physical architecture of a computing system, maybe you could like unify them in this case, like quantum computing machines, for example. But like yeah, I think like there'll probably be many cases where it's just like there are two claims which are incompatible, or it's maybe at the discretion of the theorist to argue why.
Isn't fruitful.
Yeah. But if we were to combine, like, you know, I think all of the items are accounted for by at least some of the theories that I went over. So, like, in principle, yeah, like, you know, you could have a complete theory if you are able to justify how, you know, you combine these different theories to satisfy all of the explananda.
Yeah, it tempts me to just do like theory Mad Libs, just like pair them up and get high and say like, match these two together, like what is that?
Yeah,
if
maybe
these were both true, what would that be?
yeah, maybe we can make a card game based on it. You just shuffle the cards and you have to justify how they go together. Yeah.
What's your take on epiphenomenalists?
About valence or about consciousness?
Both. Like, and I mean on them as a group of people rather than epiphenomenalism as a philosophical position.
So my take is that, like, I kind of respect it and acknowledge the arguments, but I don't take it seriously personally. You could be an epiphenomenalist about valence and maybe not about consciousness, or I don't know if vice versa would be possible. I'd have to think about that. But yeah, it's you could just be an epiphenomenalist about valence and still attempt to, I guess, like ground it or explain it in some way. Maybe you would be like rejecting the evolutionary explananda in that case because it doesn't have causal power, right? Yeah, it's a good point though, I think, on that.
What substrate do you think these other entities permeate?
Which other entities?
DMT entities.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Now this is an interesting question. I guess it's kind of like, I guess it is related to the valence question, because DMT experiences, you know, by like virtually all like trip reports that people have written about them, are like very valenced and, you know, often extremely meaningful and positive, but sometimes like they can be negative, or sometimes they can just be like weirdly neutral. I guess like, you know, there are this is probably like a separate paper that deserves to be written about like, you know, what are DMT entities? My working hypothesis is that they're just sub-agents of experiences. So there's a sense in which they exist, which is to say that like me sitting here right now, I'm like modeling all of you within my experience, and all of you are sub-agents. I'm modeling all of you as having personalities and having minds of your own. I think the same is true for DMT entities, but I would say that DMT entities, it's not obvious that they have a mind-independent existence, whereas I do think all of you have a mind-independent existence, thankfully. Unless I'm in a DMT trip right now, in which case, anything goes. So yeah.
Why do you think that they don't have a mind-independent experience?
So it's not that I think that they don't, but it's more like, I guess we haven't, tried to perform the right tests to be able to like, you could like ask a question of a DMT entity, and depending on the answer that it gives you, it could prove, like, say if you like had your friend in another room roll a die and or like roll a set of die or something like that, and then you encounter a DMT entity, and then you ask it like, what side did it land on, and if it can reliably like tell you what side it landed on, then this would be pretty strong evidence of like.
You need to find a way to convince them to want to answer those questions.
Yeah. There's actually a really good piece of writing on this. Is from Scott Alexander. Universal Love Said the Cactus Person, and yeah, like the question of like how do we even approach kind of trying to prove like not only like are these entities mind independent, but like what are they capable of? Like it's kind of interesting to think of, even if they're mind dependent, they could be capable of all sorts of advanced computations that we're just not able to do in an ordinary sober state, in which case just not enough people are working on this. So yeah, very interested.
Yeah, an organizational announcements. We've been going for almost 50 minutes, so let's take a couple more questions and then discourse and keep having discussions.
Cool. Yeah. So my question is a little beyond your paper. So if we remove Valence, right, and which happens during Vipassana meditation, for example, right? Like when you on purpose focus on detaching any judgment, positive or negative, and just like you just like fix on like counting events, no matter like positive or negative they are. That's what magic happens. So can you explain the actual like mechanism? So like if the world without balance, like what would our consciousness be, and do we need that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of like it would depend on, I guess, what theory of valence you endorse, because certainly some theories would say, yeah, it's conceivable that you can do something that changes the generation process, and now you're just like acting without valence, and you're navigating the world, and maybe like you're kind of functionally similar, but you've just found like another mechanism to motivate your behavior toward or away from particular stimuli. But then certain theories of valence would actually say that like what happens in these states of like deep meditation is that actually like this is a state of like super augmented valence in such a way that like it no longer feels like the way that we conceive of valence as being like positive or negative. It could actually just be that like really deep equanimity and like stillness is actually like that is the ultimate, like, or that's a really highly balanced state, and maybe this is a call to kind of like reinterpret or reconceptualize what we are talking about when we talk about valence, I guess. Roger Thistle has some really good writings on this. Roger Thistle. He's a
Thistle.
Thisdell. Yeah, he has a lot of really good writings on his website, and he's quite an accomplished meditator, and has interesting thoughts about the nature of valence from his meditation experience. And these are the kinds of reports that we should actually be taking seriously when it comes to like formulating a theory of valence. Like this isn't just something that we can do in the laboratory, like as I mentioned before, the only way, the only actual accurate measure of valence that we have at the moment is just like closing your eyes and introspecting on your experience. Like we still don't have an accurate or reliable way of like measuring it in other entities. So we have to take phenomenology seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, Roger might still come to this meetup. He mentioned that to me that he wanted to come. Yeah, let's take one more question, please.
Yeah, I want to ask more about like the field around this. So what's blocked kind of interest and progress in this so far, and what do you need in terms of like research infrastructure, interest, and so on, in order to make this happen?
Yeah, this is a good question. I guess like a useful starting kind of point for this would just be like, I guess publishing the paper, having other people, you know, like either just like interact with it when they're writing about something relating to the hard problem of consciousness, or maybe just like a specific kind of, you know, technical issue relating to valence. Like, you know, valence has been like very extensively studied in various different fields, like in psychology and you know, empirical science, and but I guess our claim is that like these studies are useful, but they're kind of like, they're not like grounding it. Maybe in relation to the earlier question that we had, maybe they're just like, they're trying to produce models that are like very well calibrated at like, you know, predicting, you know, the valence of a person, you know, based on self-reports, and trying to like, you know, calibrate these models to be more and more precise, but like they're not actually explaining what it is. Like, yeah, so I think that maybe from that side, from like the more empirical side, more of like an acknowledgement of like the philosophical problem, which is actually what, you know, Chalmers' paper in 1995 like was one of the core things that it did, is it actually brought like a philosophy right in the center of consciousness science. So yeah, maybe trying to accomplish something similar there, but also just like getting philosophers who maybe have their pet theories about valence to want to produce empirically testable predictions and engage more with the science, in recognition that like, you know, philosophizing will get you like, you know, it won't get you all the way there, it will get you some of the way there, and it will help you avoid like failure modes or pitfalls of inquiry, but like it's not like individually sufficient for solving the problem, if that makes sense. So yeah.